Well, hi everyone, and welcome to Golden History Museums. I'm the education curator here, and my name is Jessica. I want to thank you all for coming out to the last installment of the Show and Tell Live at Lunch lecture series. Thanks you all for being here. And today we have John Kellenbenz, who I think everyone in this room knows, but he's been associated with the Golden Fire Department since he was 11 years old, so that's over 50 years or so. And he also taught at Golden High School for about 30. That's all I'm going to say, but I'll pass it off to you now.
Okay.
And thank you very much.
I feel uncomfortable being up here, knowing that your husband was around the fire department much longer than I was, and yours was, so I'll throw some things in here, and maybe it'll be something that you haven't heard before. I've lived in Golden all my life. My home was located where the corner of Myers Hardware is, right behind the mortuary. And do you remember when I was born? Well, then I'm really in trouble now. It was 815 11th Street. My father was part owner of the mortuary through the war and for quite a while afterwards. My mother worked at Jimmy's shoe store, where she probably knew everybody in town, and she knew that I was in trouble before I knew I was in trouble. So Golden has been my home base for a long time. I worked at Golden High School from 1969 through 1999. I was a tech arts teacher, trades teacher, and so I had an awful lot of people of Golden through that time. So I've never left Golden all this time. My wife's here, Pat. My grandson's here, Jonathan James Kelly. I worked at the high school to make a living. I was a member of the fire department because I loved it. And a little history will explain why I loved it so much. My mother loved the fire department probably more than I did. And when I was a little guy growing up, if the alarm went off in Golden, you have to realize up until the mid-70s, early 70s, Golden had a communication system on Cemetery Hill. Gold Coast Circle up here was a siren. About in the center of the parking lot, where Myers Hardware is located, was a siren. And on what had been the government jail, county jail on top of Washington Street, about 15th, was a siren. And so when a fire would occur, dispatch would set all the sirens in town off. And all the firemen had a secret number that you would call, telephone number, and you found out the location of the fire. Everybody in Golden knew the number. And so oftentimes when a siren would go off, you'd hear on the phone, "Would shut up for a minute so we can tell the firemen where the fire is," and then they'd always finish it with, "It's illegal to chase fire trucks," as if that deterred anybody. So my mother would throw the kids in the car. My sister would have a book. She was happy, and we would go to the fire, and I went to a lot of fires like that. In addition to that, I had access to the fire station. So when the siren would go off in the middle of the night, being that my bedroom window was within 100 feet of a siren, I would actually hear the huge circuit breaker close and the siren start grinding up. So I would get dressed, race down the alley, open the back door, go in, open the garage doors at the front of the fire station, and be ready there when firemen would come. Now, I didn't get to go on fires, but I was down there. So it was a natural thing to go into. I was made an honorary member in 1953, November 3rd, 1953, of the fire department. At that time, Dave Crawford was fire chief. And because two of us, Paul Rice and myself, went to so many calls, and we'd help on weed fires, and we'd help load the trucks and help wash the trucks and just do those kind of things. We were taken to a lot of the firemen's conventions by various firemen. Well, I was made an honorary fire in 1953. So people are in here going through the math and everything else. Well, I was about 11 years old. So I got to go to a bunch of them. Got to go to a bunch of conventions and got to know a lot of people. The main fire station was called Central Station. And a way to describe it was directly behind Capitol Grill, right on the alley. It was the first building along the alley. If you want to think of it, Golden had one-stop shopping at the time. The front half of the building, about half, was fire department. The next door back was City Hall, where you paid for the dog catcher, you paid for your water bills, and the police chief was in there. And if you went a little bit further back in the building, was the Public Works Department. And they had 3, maybe 4 garages there, and that was the sum total of the city of Golden. So I guess you could say some of these politicians run today, if they wanted to make Golden simple, maybe that's how big Golden should be. But that's all it was amounted to it. Basically, a half a city block long, the width of one building. Between the fire department and the old Astor House was one residence. So you take the Astor House, one residence, and the fire department. That was the sum total of everything, okay? That building, the address was about 814, and coming down here, I went by one of the other fire stations. Golden's fire department is listed as, I believe, 1873, its creation. Prior to that, there were independent hose companies in Golden. And by that I mean they were contract. If they got their wagon and their firemen showed up from whatever they were doing, and they drug that wagon to the fire, they were allowed to bill you to put your fire out. And there were 3 of them that existed. There was Everett, and it was oftentimes called Everett Hook and Ladder. If you've ever seen a picture or seen the parade in the last 4 or 5 years in Golden, occasionally we'll have the old ladder wagon. It's a real long wagon, and it had ladders on it. And it was salvaged from the backside of the Weston Airs when they were out at the fairgrounds. We had a councilman who was a Western Air, and she said, could that possibly be the wagon that carried the ladders that belonged to the fire department? A little research said it did. We have it. It's in atrocious shape, but we have it. So you had Everett, Hook and Ladder, you had Loveland, and you had Excelsior. Those were the 3 independent fire companies. And so they went together in 1879 and they formed the consolidated Golden Fire Department. From 1879 on to 1953, there was a person from each fire company that became a fire chief. So Excelsior was 1 year, Everett would be the next year. The next year, every 3 years, you have a rotation up till 1953. 1953 became the first time that we had a fire chief that was at large, could come from any company. By then, I think most of the people that were of that older age that had belonged to those Excelsior and all of them had passed on. But 53 is where that period stopped. Okay. The only one that I knew was the Loveland Fire Station, which is now the American Legion at 9th and 4 East Street, American Legion Hall. And I looked up some facts. There's a history book of Golden, of the fire department, that is about the most boring thing to read you've ever wanted to read. But in it, it has a chapter about that building over there. And if you ever want to get that book, it tells about Adolf Coors, probably 5 generations ago, helped build the building. But people bought interest in that building, such as, I think a window was $1.50. And so maybe Clyde's bar service, I remember some beer hall provided 2 windows. And some horse and buggy team provided a window. And somebody provided roof shingles. And old Adolph provided this and that. But anyway, that rock building that was over there was built by the Loveland Fire Company. And that was their headquarters. When I joined the fire department in 1969, it was still our meeting hall. We had Central Station uptown, Central Station had passed. We now had this building down here. This building down here was built in 1961. So the equipment was here, but the firemen met over at Old Loveland Hall. And that was sold in 1974 by the volunteers, not the city, the volunteers, to put an addition on the station that was down here at 911 so that they could now buy their new aerial that was coming in 1974, put it in a building. So that building was actually paid for by volunteers, not out of city funds. So it was an addition that was put on. So I met the first 5 years that I joined the fire department over there in that building. And it was a neat building. I would love to know what happened to the pool table that was in there. They had a hand-carved, huge, full-sized leather cushions and all that beautiful pool table. And when it became part of the American Legion, no one seems to know. I think they left it, and nobody knows whatever happened to it. But that was the early part of fire service in here. As I said, I joined the fire department in '69. I had gone off to college. I came back and I was now teaching at the high school. I have had all the positions in the fire department. I was chief for 3 years. I was assistant chief for 4 years. I was a captain for 4 years. I was assistant fire marshal. I was ticket taker at the door. I got to do everything. So I ended up with being on the fire department 27 years, just short of 27 years. So I had association in '53. I joined in '69. I quit in '99 or '96. And the reason I quit at '96 is I was still enjoying it. But the fire department has had a pension through the years. And the original pension was as little as $5 a month. But upon reaching your 50th birthday, you could take pension. Still to this day is that way. So after 20 years, you could take pension. I had the almost 27. So I get a small pension from the city that went into the fire department fund. Interesting fact, when I was still on the fire department, they considered going paid. And they took a comparable city, which at that time was Durango, and Durango went paid. And to go with a minimum staff fire department would cost about $1.3 to $1.6 million for people. Not necessarily equipment, facilities, and all those things, but that much. I would imagine today if Chief Bales was to talk, and he probably does say this, that it would probably be just a little under $2 million to have people as opposed to volunteers. We were an all-volunteer fire department. I'll get you that here. Till Chief Wallace became our fire chief.